I have spent a huge amount of time in the world of audiobooks, and I just wanted to explore 10 narrator performances that I think really alter the books that they're reading for the better. Okay, my first book is actually a book that I don't think is a great book, but I think I was almost tricked into liking the book more by the performance of the narrator, and that book is Ready Player One, which I read when it first came out a while ago. And granted, I'm a big Will Wheaton fan. Go to Comic-Con. I love big board game fan, so I'm kind of predisposed to like Will Wheaton. But I found that when I went to go read the sequel book, I was shocked at how difficult I found to read the physical book, even though I'd really enjoyed the first book. And just looking at how clunky and difficult to read the copy was, I was shocked by it, and I thought, oh my gosh, has this been a huge drop in quality for the author? And then when I went back and just looked at the physical copy of Ready Player One, I was like, no, it's kind of the same. And then when I realized that I'd been listening to the audiobook performance, I realized how much Will Wheaton's enthusiasm and probably like personal experience with a lot of the topics and a lot of the themes of the first book just added so much. Like, I thought the performance really sanded down a lot of the edges of the writing and really added a lot to it. So I definitely think this is a great example of a skilled narrator can really elevate a book that's like, that I personally could not have gotten through it if I'd been just reading it. Number two is a book that I think is an excellent, amazing book, Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. And I'm sure it's an amazing book to read, but with the audiobook experience, like a lot of the accents, just sort of the musicality and the skill with language that Trevor Noah has really comes through in the book. And also one of the things that really stuck with me that I still copy to this day is I love his like fake yelling voice in that book. He just has this amazing like, when I come here. It's a terrible impression, but just amazing audiobook like delivery. There's just so much in tone and musicality and performance that you don't get reading the physical book, which I'm sure is a great book. Now, The Inconvenient Indian by Thomas King, narrated by Lauren Cardinal. This book deals with pretty heavy subject matter. It's an amazing book. I think it's written with such deftness and humor and tone and just skill in dealing with like big historical issues that are really important and kind of heavy, obviously. But the deftness and the tone and the rich humor that comes through is just really underlined or enhanced by having Lord Cardinal read it, from Corner Gas and some other stuff. Just his delivery is just so wry and rich and warm that it adds a ton to this book. So I definitely recommend the audiobook version of this. Say Nothing by Patrick Radden Keefe. This is one of my all-time favorite books, one of my all-time favorite audiobook experiences. I've listened to it at least 3 times. This is such an epic page-turner of a nonfiction novel. I know his later book on the opiates was also really good, but this audiobook I think was just like an amazing example of how the rich Irish, like brogue, or I don't know if that's the right word, the richness of Matthew Blaney's performance is just adds so much. And just when he reads all the names and the locations in this book about the Troubles, and it really just adds so much. And I think that becomes sort of a theme with this list. A lot of it is there's like, in an area that's like, that is new to me, like a culturally different area, there is an ignorance I have about language and accent and tone and pace that is added with the right narrator. That really adds like a real element of richness and atmosphere. And so I just really love this audiobook. Also just a great book for, it was just amazing, especially like the female freedom fighters or terrorists or whatever. So Honey and Spice by Bolu Babula. This is a shift from the other books. Again, This is a more recent, I think it's like a YA romance novel. It takes place in the United Kingdom with a group of students whose families hail from Nigeria. It's a cute book, and I liked it. It was an interesting read and an interesting window into, again, like the other books I've been talking about, in a world that I'm not familiar with or was not part of. There's things that I would read in my boring Canadian accent in my head that just is lost in translation, and is unlocked with audiobooks like this. So it's a great performance. It's fun. It's lively. She really carries this is a great book where the character performance of the narrator is perfect. Like, she really is good at like speaking in the different characters, like the love interest and the main character, without feeling like she is an over-enthusiastic librarian doing voices, if you know what I mean. Like, some audiobook narrators take it a little too far with voices, and you're like, it removes you from the story. If they're not, it's like a fine line between, you know, being too actory and being a good narrator. But she really walks that line really well, and I really recommend this one. Next one it's like a great book. I love Project Hail Mary. I'm not alone. I know like a million people love it. This book I read and weeped and loved. I read it physically very quickly and loved it. And then I'd heard people talking about how great the audiobook was, and the audiobook, do not sleep on it, adds so much to the experience. There's a lot of, without giving anything away, there's some like musical parts of the book, or some references to music and characters who speak in alien languages. And the audiobook is so fun in their interpretation of those things. And also the narrator is a classic legend of audiobook narrators, I think, as far as I know, Ray Porter. And he just gives like such a detached, funny scientist voice, just brings it to life and adds a lot to it. So that book, I love both formats, but definitely check out the audiobook for that one, because it adds a whole bunch of elements that are not there in the like reading part. Big Little Lies, Apple First Falls from the Tree, What Alice Forgot, a bunch of books about the rich domestic lives of women in Australia. And although like the books I've kind of put them all together because I've read a bunch of the books, and it's not that I'm raving about one individually. I just find that the narrator of them, Caroline Lee, one of the narrators, adds such a crisp Australian wit to a lot of the books that I'm really disappointed with the few books that don't have her as a narrator. I just find that she adds so much tone and snark and humor in her delivery of these books that I think is missing, and you just get a bit of that Australian flair from it. Again, a lot of these audiobooks just add a sort of a regional knowledge of accent and language that I don't have myself. So it's like adding something to the book that just reading off the page doesn't quite give. Number 8, Queenie, written by Candace Carly Williams, narrated by Siobhan Marks. Did I get that right? Anyway, I'll fix it later if I didn't. Queenie, just dealing with like East Side Londoners from like in their Jamaican immigrant community, adds again another layer, like the accents and the pronunciation of food and dialect add a lot to the audiobook. Number 9 is Comedy by Bob Odenkirk. I've noticed that other reviews don't love it as much as I do, but I am a giant 90s comedy nerd. You know, grew up watching SNL, love sketch comedy, love Kids in the Hall, that kind of stuff. And this book is a must for comedy nerds who love comedy history, which is maybe niche, but if you do, then I love this book. And Bob Odenkirk, I mean, it's Better Call Saul. Like, His delivery is amazing. His detached deadpan reading of this like great comedy history is really lovely if you're into that sort of thing. And finally, the big like blockbuster book from this year, I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. Her delivery is so wry and so funny and so sort of detached, especially in dealing with some like pretty traumatic, crazy stuff in the book, including like there's parts in it that are just really hard and intense, and you can almost hear her voice crack in it, and that is extra emotional after hearing how strong and together she is through the other parts of the book. But there's like sparkle and twinges of humor and depth and richness that come through in her audiobook performance that I think I just like really recommend. I think it'd be a great book to read and like standard, and it's an amazing audiobook. Definitely recommend the audiobook experience. And finally, I had said that I would talk about a book that had the opposite effect for me. So forever, I'm Canadian who loves literature, who loves like dystopian fantasy. So you'd think I would have read The Handmaid's Tale and I would have loved it. Now, quite a while ago, I bought the Claire Danes version of it and I could not get into it. And I tried and I tried and I tried. And although I love Claire Danes, like I love My So-Called Life, like, you know, love Claire Danes, but sometimes when Hollywood actors, like I think narrating a book is a different skill than just straight up acting. And this book, there's just something about it, even though I love Claire Danes, like her delivery is just sort of like stilted or performative in a way that took me right out of the book. And I was in my did not finish pile forever. And then I finally switched to the physical book, plowed through it, loved it, and just found that this delivery, this audiobook performance was just it was the opposite of a lot of these other ones. Even though you have first-rate book, first-rate like actor, just not, in my opinion, first-rate narrating. Let me know if there's any audiobook performances that you think really stand out or really detract from books, and let me know if you disagree with any of the ones that I've selected.